The barracks stank of confidence. Sergeant Rykov had just returned from another simulation run, his boots leaving dry prints of red Martian dust on the chrome floor. Around him, young recruits from Earth, Venus, and the moon colonies cheered and compared kill counts, smirking as they loaded footage of their VR victories into the shared lounge feed. "I cleared the entire Zarl hive in under 6 minutes," bragged Trooper Jace, tossing his helmet on the couch. "Tell me again why they call these aliens a threat." A chorus of laughter followed. Rykov didn't join in. He just sat down, watching them like a man too old for this kind of cheerfulness. Truth be told, he was. 30 years in the Interplanetary Corps had taught him 2 things. 1, the younger the soldier, the more they overestimated their own guts. And 2, simulations had never made anyone ready for actual war, not real war. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered, sipping a cup of water like it was whiskey. "Because none of you have bled yet." The room quieted slightly, a ripple of discomfort spreading like a silent wave. No one wanted to be the one to challenge the old man, not tonight. But that was the problem. No one had bled. Not really. The Terran military had become a machine of showboats and screen warriors. For decades, every alien species they encountered either surrendered quickly or were so technologically backward that they were wiped out within weeks. Humanity believed itself to be unmatched, untouchable. Until now. 2 days later, a distress call arrived from Outpost Gray 17, a scientific station orbiting Gliese 412b. Contact with its crew was lost. The footage sent moments before blackout showed strange movements, gray shadows that danced through metal walls without triggering sensors, no visible weapons, no demands, just silence. Command deployed the 82nd Tactical Force. Rykov was on that drop, riding down in the carrier ship Stone Widow. Half his squad were kids barely past 20. The other half were exosuit-hardened veterans from the Jupiter Wars. It didn't matter. None of them had seen a real fight in years. They landed without resistance. The base looked untouched from above. A clean, beautiful fake. Inside was a tomb. Lights flickered in long corridors. Blood trails, human blood, lined the floors like wet ropes leading into darkness. Helmets were scattered like toys. Some had been punctured through the center. Rykov found a body, or what was left of one. The torso had been opened and emptied, organs removed with surgical precision. No signs of firepower, no burn marks, just an eerie calm. Then came the first scream. Private Henley, one of the loudmouths from earlier, vanished in a flash of movement. His rifle clattered against the metal before anyone realized what happened. And that was when they saw them. Thin, pale, vaguely humanoid. No eyes, no mouths. The foreigners moved like liquid shadows, slipping through doors, floors, even walls. And when they touched a soldier, that soldier didn't scream long. The 82nd Tactical Force fought back, fired everything they had. Plasma rifles, rail cannons, explosives. Some foreigners dropped, but for every one they killed, 2 more emerged. Their tactics weren't based on brute force. They were smart. They flanked. They learned. One even used a dead human's weapon to blow a hole through a security door. This wasn't just another alien extermination. This was survival. Humanity had sent its best, the arrogant, the trained, the elite, and they were dying fast. When the Stone Widow lifted off 3 hours later, less than 20 soldiers made it back. Half were bleeding. Rykov had lost an arm. He stared at the corpses wrapped in bags on the floor, then at the wide-eyed survivors who could barely speak. Now they knew. They didn't understand combat before, not until the foreigners made them bleed. The medbay was quiet, But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that wraps around your chest and won't let you breathe. Sergeant Rykov lay on a slab bed, his shoulder bandaged, stump neatly sealed with synth skin. The medical bots had done their job efficiently, painlessly, but no machine could fix what the foreigners had ripped apart inside his mind. He watched the ceiling, unmoving. He wasn't alone in that silence. Across from him, Private Mason trembled under a thermal blanket, whispering prayers in a language Rykov couldn't place. Beside her, Trooper Alvarez stared at nothing, eyes glazed, lips dry and cracked. He hadn't spoken since the ship left orbit. Not a word. Not even when the captain offered him water, or when the doc bot tried stitching a wound across his gut. They were the lucky ones. Behind the closed curtains, the less lucky were being zipped into black polymer bags. Half the medbay had turned into a makeshift morgue. Nobody had expected that many casualties. The auto stretchers ran non-stop, like death was on a factory conveyor belt. The survivors heard every zip, every tag being printed, every soft hum of a bag being sealed shut. Rykov finally spoke, voice barely above a breath. "We weren't ready." No one answered, not because they didn't agree, but because they were too ashamed to admit it out loud. These were elite Terran soldiers, praised, medaled, built into legends through polished propaganda and digital war stories. But none of those stories prepared them for what they saw on Gray 17. And the worst part? Command didn't believe a word. The debrief was a farce. Major Celine sat behind a reinforced glass desk on the Atlas Vanguard, Earth's primary command cruiser. She was all sharp cheekbones, tight bun, and sharper eyes. She didn't flinch as Rykov recounted what happened. Not even when he described the creature slipping through walls, or the way Henley disappeared mid-step, like he'd been swallowed by thin air. "You're telling me these aliens engaged in stealth infiltration?" she said, tone too calm. "Despite having no visible tech, armor, or standard weaponry?" "They didn't need weapons," Rykov snapped. "They were weapons." Celine's brow raised ever so slightly. "Did you recover any bodies?" Rykov shook his head. "Not a single one. They either self-destructed or dissolved. I don't know. They were gone by the time we tried collecting samples." "And yet," she said, leaning back, "you claim they killed 62 of our best troops in under 3 hours." He leaned forward, voice steady. "They didn't just kill us. They studied us while killing us. They moved tactically. They learned." Celine typed something into her tablet. "There's no corroborating footage. No black box logs survived. Your carrier's external cams were wiped." "That's because they're smarter than we are." That made her pause. "Just a second. You understand what you're implying, Sergeant," she said. "A new alien species that not only outmatches us in close-quarters combat, but one that could potentially override our surveillance systems? That's a declaration of an interstellar threat. That would mean war." Rykov stood. "It already is," he said, his voice dark and low. "We just haven't admitted we're losing yet." By the end of that week, only 2 things had changed. First, the media scrubbed any trace of what happened at Gray 17. The incident was labeled a routine communication failure due to solar interference. The names of the dead? Listed quietly as casualties from a shuttle malfunction. No funerals, no medals, no truth. Second, Rykov was ordered back to Earth for reassignment. No field duty, no active missions. He was a liability now. A disturbed veteran with unverifiable reports. But they didn't court-martial him, because somewhere deep down, in the corners of command they didn't speak about, they knew he was right, and that terrified them. So they buried it. But truth has a way of clawing back to the surface. It was nearly 4 weeks later when the second strike hit. This time it wasn't a remote outpost or a research satellite. It was Station Amara, a Class A orbital city above New Cydonia, housing nearly 40,000 civilians. Engineers, scientists, families, gone. Every signal cut in less than 6 minutes. No debris, no warning, no survivors. The only thing left was a single, looping transmission sent across every Terran frequency. 4 words. "We studied your death." Rykov saw it play out on a cracked monitor in a refugee center where he'd spent his exile trying to forget. People screamed around him, news anchors froze mid-sentence, and across the screen those words kept flashing. "We studied your death." And that was when humanity finally understood. This wasn't a skirmish. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was war. They called them Vakar after the signal fragment they'd intercepted during the Amara broadcast. No one knew what the name meant. It didn't matter. It stuck. The Vakar didn't come in ships. They appeared, manifested in bursts of gravitational anomaly, slipping through dimensions like ghosts entering dreams. No one detected them before it was too late. They never negotiated. They never spoke. They never repeated targets. Once a place was destroyed, they vanished, leaving only confusion and corpses. For every attack, humanity lost hundreds, sometimes thousands. None of the old tactics worked. Drones failed. Orbital defenses were bypassed like they didn't exist. AI targeting systems couldn't lock on. Every encounter felt like fighting fog with a blade. Rykov's warnings resurfaced, but too late. "Bring him back." Those were the first words out of Admiral Hensley's mouth during the Emergency War Summit. Rykov was flown back into orbit less than 12 hours later. He arrived with a cold stare and a stitched-up uniform, his empty sleeve hanging like a flag of shame. And survival. "You've seen them," Hensley said. "You fought them. I watched them rip through my men like paper. We need to fight back." Rykov nodded slowly. "Then we need to unlearn everything we think we know about combat." The new unit was born in silence. No ceremony, no flag. Just files labeled Project Tombstone, a covert task force built not from the best shooters, but the best adapters. Rykov handpicked them. Not heroes, not aces, but the broken ones, the quiet ones, the survivors. They trained in low-light vacuums, under pressure chambers, in hostile sim loops designed to break minds. They studied the Vakar's moves, every blurry second of battle footage, every noise fragment, every trajectory. They became ghosts hunting shadows. By the 3rd month, Rykov's team made contact, and this time they struck first. It was a small moon base near Eltarin 5, one believed to be dormant. The Vakar had used it twice for ambushes. Tombstone infiltrated the base through a pressure tube in complete silence, skin-tight suits coated with signal-jamming nanofilm. They planted bombs not where the walls were, but where sound traveled strangely. They lured the Vakar with mimic beacons, devices that mimicked the fear echoes human soldiers had emitted in their dying moments. The creatures responded, curious, hungry. Rykov watched as they phased through the floors again, like before. But this time, the walls exploded. It wasn't a clean kill. Half the team didn't make it back. The rest were scraped out of their suits, half choked, half frozen. But they killed them, for the first time. A dozen confirmed dead. No vapor, no vanish. Bodies. Real alien bodies. The tide had turned, but only just. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But humanity had finally learned something the Vakar hadn't expected them to. Pain didn't break them. It sharpened them. The briefing room on Blackreach Station smelled of metal, sweat, and recycled oxygen. It was buried 3 kilometers beneath the Martian surface, reinforced with layers of signal-proof alloy. No transmissions came in or out without manual authorization. The place wasn't on any registry. It didn't exist, at least not on paper, which made it perfect for Project Tombstone. Rykov stood in front of a curved display screen, arms crossed over his chest, one sleeve pinned just below his shoulder. The room was dimly lit, designed to mimic low-light environments, the same kind of lighting found in most Vakar engagements. A dozen soldiers sat in the room with him. Not new recruits, not grinning optimists. These were survivors. Eyes haunted, hands twitching, scars they didn't bother to hide. "Listen up," Rykov began, his voice gravel. "We're done pretending this is a war we can win with numbers. This isn't about firepower anymore." He tapped the console. A blurry image appeared. It was one of the Vakar bodies retrieved from the Eltarin 5 raid, 7 feet tall, limbs that looked too thin to support weight, but were strong enough to rip a man in half. Skin the color of wet stone. And no face, no features, just a smooth mask of pale tissue that shimmered slightly in the light. "We've spent the last 6 weeks dissecting this thing," Rykov continued. "Biotech hybrid, carbon frame, partial phase matter structure." "What the hell does that mean?" muttered Harper, a sniper from Europa. She had a bullet lodged near her spine, too risky to remove. She walked with a limp now, but her trigger finger was still steady. "It means," Rykov said, "they're not entirely in our dimension." A silence swept through the room. Even the ones who'd seen the Vakar firsthand weren't ready to hear that. "They exist on a fluctuating quantum frequency," added Dr. Rima Sato, stepping forward. She was a civilian specialist attached to Tombstone after the Amara attack. "In simple terms, they're half here, half somewhere else. They only become fully solid when they attack." "So they're ghosts," muttered Alvarez, finally breaking his long silence. "No," Sato said. "They're better." Rykov didn't blink. "Which is why we're not going in guns blazing anymore," he said. "We're changing tactics. From now on, every mission is precision, disruption, and information extraction. If you're looking for glory, get out now. This is survival work." Nobody moved. That was enough. The next mission was unlike anything the Corps had done before. It wasn't a raid. It was a recovery. A team of scientists from Earth's deep signal array had picked up something strange. A repeating frequency buried inside dark matter pockets near Proxima Delta. The message was short, 8 seconds long, but unmistakably human. A voice. Male. Shaky. Distorted. "This is Corporal Mathers. Station Vega 9. Breached. Survivors 3. Hiding. They're learning. Help." That station had been declared lost nearly 7 months ago. No life signs, no pings, no flares. Everyone assumed the Vakar had wiped it. Apparently, someone had survived. And the Vakar hadn't killed him. They were keeping him. The reason? Unknown. But to Rykov, it was simple. Information. The Vakar were smart. Smarter than anyone had admitted. They didn't destroy everything. They observed, interrogated, experimented. And now humanity had a chance to pull someone back from the shadows. Tombstone inserted with no fanfare. Silent drop. No external beacons. Each soldier wore a second-generation stealth suit woven with phased disruptors, courtesy of Sato and her research team. They didn't block detection completely, but they blurred heat and motion enough to confuse the Vakar senses. They landed in the Vega 9 wreckage, or what was left of it. The outer hull was shattered, like something had peeled it open from the inside. Frozen corpses drifted in the zero-gravity corridors, their faces twisted in shock. Most had been killed instantly, but some had wounds that looked slow, deliberate. Rykov's voice crackled in everyone's ears. "Keep comms to whispers. No lights unless absolutely necessary. Harper, you're on overwatch. Alvarez, with me. They moved through the corridors like rats in a tunnel. Every few meters, a motion blur passed just outside visual range. Fast, silent. The Vakar were here, watching. But they didn't attack. Not yet. It was like they were curious. They reached the core sector where the signal had originated. A sealed chamber. Manual override only. No digital interface. The locks had been melted down. Fused. Rykov turned to Mace, their breacher. Quiet charges, we go in fast. 10 seconds later, the door peeled open like a wound. Inside, the smell hit first. Rotting food, human waste, sweat, then the sound. Breathing. Heavy. Shallow. And then they saw him. Corporal Mathers, or what was left of him. He was curled in a fetal position, wrapped in thermal insulation, skin pale and blotchy. One eye swollen shut, the other bloodshot and darting like a cornered animal. Alvarez knelt beside him. Corporal, we're here to get you out. Mathers flinched. Are you real? He rasped. Or just more of their games? We're real, Rykov said, kneeling, but we don't have much time. Can you walk? Mathers tried to nod. His legs collapsed under him. Rykov caught him with one arm. Let's move. That was when the walls began to vibrate. The air changed. The shadows came alive. They ran. No formation, no flanking, just raw escape. Mathers was slung across Rykov's shoulder. Harper covered the rear, her rifle barking short, controlled bursts. They're not attacking, she shouted. They're hurting us. She was right. Every corridor seemed to close off behind them. Doors sealed. Pressure shifted, like the station was guiding them. Toward what? They didn't find out, because when they reached the extraction point, the Vakar finally struck. Not in rage, in precision. One dropped from the ceiling like liquid shadow, slamming Mace against the wall. Another phased through the floor, clawing at Harper's leg. Rykov fired point blank into its chest. Plasma rounds lit the thing's insides like a paper lantern. It didn't scream, it just watched him, even as it collapsed. They reached the shuttle. Alvarez and Harper barely made it, both bleeding. Mathers was in shock. Rykov hit the seal button. The Vakar didn't follow. They just stood at the bay doors, watching, recording, learning. Again. Back at Blackreach, Mathers was sedated. His initial scans showed signs of neural tampering, memory triggers implanted, synthetic dreams. The Vakar hadn't just kept him alive, they'd rewritten parts of his mind. Why? Sato asked in horror. Rykov didn't answer. He was watching a playback of the extraction. Freeze frame, zoom, one of the Vakar, staring into the shuttle as they escaped. There, on its torso, etched like scar tissue. A crude symbol. 4 lines. 1 star. The Terran military insignia. Rykov's voice was quiet, cold. They're not just studying our death anymore. He turned, eyes dark. They're studying what makes us human. Corporal Mathers sat strapped to a biomonitor chair in Blackreach's secure med lab. The room was padded in gray polymer, lights dimmed to avoid overstimulating his fractured senses. 2 guards stood outside the reinforced glass wall. Inside, Dr. Rima Sato stood in front of him, hands folded, trying not to betray the unease pulling at her gut. He looked human, but that didn't mean he was anymore. His eyes flicked back and forth, sometimes stopping on objects that weren't there. He blinked like he was watching something only he could see. His pulse was erratic. Brain activity lit up in patterns Sato had never seen in a human subject before. Almost like dual consciousness. As if another awareness was crawling inside his skull, occasionally tapping the controls. Do you remember your name? She asked gently. He nodded. Slow. Mathers, Corporal Isaac. First Recon. She offered a weak smile. Good. That's good. Do you know where you are now? Someplace safer, but not safe, he said. They're still watching. Who? His gaze snapped to her, eyes suddenly razor-sharp. The ones who borrowed my mind. Sato held back a shiver. She tapped a command into her pad. The neural projector behind him began pulsing in soft blue waves. We found something abnormal in your scans. Patterns we can't explain. You're showing memory clusters that aren't yours. Do you know how that's possible? Mathers laughed softly, not out of amusement, more like someone cracking under invisible pressure. They didn't want to know what I knew, he whispered. They wanted to know how I learned. Emotions, instinct, pain, love, hate. They pulled my memories apart, not just to study them, but to simulate them. He looked at the wall, past it, past the station itself. They're building something, he said, and they're using us to do it. Rykov stared at the analysis later that night, fists clenched. Sato sat across from him, her expression unreadable. The Vakar didn't keep Mathers alive out of mercy. He was a biological conduit. They implanted synthetic memory triggers, flashes of war, anger, grief, and they recorded how his brain responded. They're reverse engineering our psychology, Rykov muttered. Yes, but not just for study. She tapped the final slide in her report. The screen flickered to show a rotating digital model, part alien, part human. They're building hybrids, Sergeant. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the abomination. It had the elongated, sleek frame of a Vakar, but it was bulkier, denser. Its joints bent like a human's. The limbs could hold human-crafted weapons. Its nervous system resembled a twisted mirror of Mather's own scan. They're adapting our strengths, Rykov said slowly. Learning not just how we fight, but why we fight. Emotions, reflexes, tactical instinct. They're trying to merge our adaptability with their biology. They want to beat us at being human. The next few days passed in a storm of activity. Tombstone received a new directive from Earth Central, Operation Needle, a preemptive strike on what was believed to be the Vakar's test site for these hybrids. The intel came from a signal fragment buried in Mather's neural implants. A location, Delta Pyros Belt, a dense asteroid field wrapped in magnetic storms. No Terran vessel had ever charted that region. But now Rykov and his team were being sent in blind. Again, he hated it. This is a trap, Harper said as they prepped their gear. Every op is, Rykov replied. But we're not going to win this war hiding behind intel. We go in, confirm hybrid activity, and extract whatever proof we can. No hero moves. Harper grunted. So just a normal suicide run then? He almost smiled. Almost. The drop was rough. The shuttle bucked violently as it slipped through the radiation belt, shields flaring red. By the time they reached the asteroid base, most of the team had vomited at least once. Only Rykov looked calm. They docked on the shadowed side of the largest rock, an irregular black mass riddled with tunnels that pulsed faintly like veins. Inside, the silence was unnatural. No air circulation, no machinery hum. Just the occasional drip of condensation and the team's slowed breathing through rebreather masks. They moved carefully, rifles sweeping every corner. The deeper they went, the more unnatural things became. Walls grew smoother, patterns etched along the stone, repeating symbols, like a language or code, one that shifted slightly when you weren't looking. They found the first lab chamber on level 6 and froze. Inside were rows of incubation pods, not metal, not glass, something organic, translucent. Shapes floated inside, humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too twisted. Some had human eyes, others had none. One still had part of a face, a female face. Jesus, Mace muttered. That's Dr. Halen, Harper said, swallowing. She was part of the Amara team. I remember her photo. Why keep them like this? Alvarez asked. To copy, Rykov answered grimly, or to remind themselves how far they've come. That's when one of the pods burst open. The thing that stepped out looked like a mockery of humanity. It moved with the speed of a Vakar, but with human coordination. It didn't phase through walls. It ran straight at them. Tactical, calculated. Harper fired a burst into its chest. It didn't stop. Rykov lunged forward, using a modified phase saber, a prototype weapon designed specifically for semi-dimensional entities. The blade carved through the hybrid's neck. It fell, twitching, but not dead. Its lips moved. No sound, just shapes, mimicking speech. Sato's voice crackled in through comms. She was monitoring remotely. It's trying to talk, she said. Recording now. The thing's eyes locked on Rykov. Then it whispered, in a voice disturbingly familiar, We are becoming you. Rykov didn't flinch. He raised the phase saber again and drove it through the creature's chest. You're still bleeding wrong, he muttered. The rest of the lab was worse. Thousands of pods, each more evolved, some nearly indistinguishable from real humans, until you looked at their hands, their eyes, their mouths. The team collected data cores, neural maps, and DNA samples. They detonated explosives in the lower chambers. Fire raged through the tunnels. Pods ruptured. The wails of not-quite-human monsters echoed through the corridors like nightmares dying. As they escaped, the rock itself began to tremble. The base wasn't just a lab. It was alive. The Vakar had turned the asteroid into a growing organism, something that could expand, replicate, and host an entire generation of their new weapons. They barely made it to the shuttle. By the time the core charges detonated, the entire rock cracked apart, bleeding violet plasma into the vacuum. From orbit, it looked like a star had died. Back at Blackreach, Rykov sat across from Sato again. She was pale, shaken. I've analyzed the audio. That voice, the hybrid copied it from one of our dead soldiers, Private Hendricks. It reconstructed his vocal cords perfectly. They're not just fighting to kill us, Rykov said. Number. They're fighting to replace us. She swallowed. There's something else. She tapped her screen. The DNA from one of the hybrid samples. Rykov's brows furrowed. That sequence, he started. It's yours, she finished. They're building a new army. He sat back, heavy. They're using us as the template. The fallout hit harder than the Vakar's first strike. It started with a leak. An anonymous data dump uploaded to the shadow feed showed video footage from Tombstone's last mission, images of the hybrid lab, the broken pods, the twisted things inside them. Someone had pulled Sato's autopsy logs, too, side-by-side comparisons of human DNA with Vakar flesh, scans of the hybrid brain, still firing electrical signals long after death. And then the kicker, a clipped voice, barely audible, from one of the hybrids. We are becoming you. Panic spread like infection. On Earth, people stormed research labs. Anti-alien riots erupted in major cities. Conspiracy groups called for purges of any citizen with recent genetic treatments or biomechanical implants. They claimed the Vakar were infiltrating society, masquerading as humans. The panic wasn't completely wrong, because Sato's research had confirmed something Rykov had feared since they left that asteroid. The hybrids were already among them. 2 confirmed cases, one in a government monitoring station in Sydney, one in a deep space transport crew. Both had passed biometrics, both had bled red, and both had slaughtered their colleagues the moment they were discovered. Inside Blackreach, things weren't much better. Command had fractured. The high brass were split between 2 camps, one pushing for full military lockdown of Earth and its colonies, the other insisting on further study to understand the Vakar fully before striking again. Rykov had no time for either. "You don't cage a fire with paper," he growled during a heated meeting with General Stamos, the highest-ranking official still backing Tombstone. "They're building replacements," he continued. "You think waiting is going to make them more reasonable? They're evolving as we argue. We've seen it." Stamos leaned back in the holochair. His face was drawn, tired. "We have no confirmed method of tracking their movements," he said. "They appear and disappear at will. We send forces. They disappear again. Even your strike on the lab didn't slow them." "That's why I'm not sending another team," Rykov said. Stamos blinked. "What?" "I'm going alone." The room went dead silent. It took 3 days to prepare. Rykov underwent a risky neural sync procedure designed by Sato. It wasn't authorized by any medical board. It wasn't even legal under interstellar ethics law. But it was the only shot they had. The idea was insane. Implant Rykov with a temporary strand of Vakar neural code, synthesized from the corpse of the hybrid that had mimicked Hendrix. The implant wouldn't make him one of them, but it would mask his biosignature just enough to fool their sensory fields. "You'll have 12 hours before your immune system starts rejecting it," Sato warned. "After that, you'll start hallucinating. After 16 hours, your brain could seize." "Then I won't take 16, Rykov said, already climbing into the containment rig. "You understand what this means, don't you?" she asked, almost whispering. "If they catch on, if they realize what you are, they won't." She paused, then added, "I'm not coming in after you." He gave a small smile. "I wouldn't ask you to." The Vakar didn't have ships, not in the way humans understood them. They appeared. They unfolded from space, like dimensions bending around a core. They rode on gravitational fault lines, bypassing mass and energy, as if neither mattered. But Rykov had learned their patterns. They always returned to observation nexuses, silent fields in deep space where they recorded human activity. One such nexus had been tracked near the barren planetoid AX-07, a dead rock with no life, no value, and, until now, no reason to exist. He went in aboard a stealth drop capsule no larger than a coffin, no escort, no fallback, only him, a sidearm, a phase blade, and the Vakar code burning faintly through his nervous system. As the capsule pierced the void near AX-07, something rippled in the space ahead. And they came. The Vakar ship wasn't a structure. It was an event. It unfolded around him like a flower blooming in reverse. Space rippled, light bent, and suddenly Rykov was standing in a place that defied logic. No gravity, no walls, just blackness streaked with veins of light, pulsing veins, living veins. He moved through it, floating yet grounded. Every step triggered a ripple beneath his boots, like the ship noticed him but hadn't recognized him yet. Shapes moved ahead. Not the sleek, inhuman Vakar he'd fought before. Humanoid silhouettes, dozens of them. They stood in a circle, unmoving, observing something. Rykov crept closer, his breathing slowed. In the center of the room, suspended like an offering, was another Rykov. His face, his uniform, even the missing arm, but still breathing, still alive. He wasn't the only one. There were others, Harper, Alvarez, even Sato, perfect clones, hanging in strange fluid sacs, twitching in sleep. A cold dread filled him. They weren't just copying the dead anymore. They were copying the living. A whisper entered his mind. Not through his ears. Through the implant. "You brought yourself to us." He turned slowly. One of them stood there. Not Vakar, not hybrid. Something else. It wore his face. Not a clone, but a reflection, a mirror image with too many teeth behind its smile. It spoke again, mouth moving this time. "You think war is your weapon. It is your weakness. We do not conquer. We replace." Rykov's fingers tightened around his sidearm. "You don't understand what you're becoming," he said. "We understand more than you do. You cling to pain. We learn from it. You fear loss. We perfect it." The thing stepped closer. "You still don't see. We don't hate humanity. We envy it." Rykov moved fast, a burst of fire into the clone's chest, another toward the nearest tank. Alarms screamed in tones his brain barely registered as sound. Lights flared, and the ship reacted. Walls twisted, veins pulsed red. But Rykov was already running. He planted the virus chip Sato had embedded into his suit. A data spike loaded with every lie, every false protocol, every corrupted code they'd scraped from Terran networks. If uploaded, it wouldn't destroy the ship. It would make the Vakar doubt themselves. Confusion, delay, disruption. The only weapon that worked now. As the virus pulsed into the system, Rykov felt a wave of pressure crash against his skull. His implant burned. Time was almost up. He turned back for the capsule port. The Vakar roared behind him, not with mouths, but with memory. A scream of stolen pain. He dived into the capsule, hit the ignition. The last thing he saw as the wormhole closed was his own face, watching him leave. Smiling. The capsule landed in Blackreach like a meteor, crashed through 2 decks. The rescue crew found Rykov unconscious, bleeding from the ears, the implant fried, but alive. Barely. As Sato pulled the helmet from his head, his eyes fluttered open. Just barely. "They're not stopping," he croaked. She nodded. "We didn't expect them to. But we've got a new weapon now." He reached into his belt. Burned, but intact. The chip. "They don't know what it means to doubt. We just taught them." She took the chip, her hands shaking. "What now?" she asked. Rykov gave a bitter grin, blood in his teeth. "Now we make them bleed for real." It started with a glitch. A Vakar incursion fleet, 12-dimensional ships, had materialized above the gas giant Kirella, right on schedule. Their appearance had followed the same pattern for weeks. Study, scan, vanish. But this time, something went wrong. One of the ships didn't phase out. It just lingered. It drifted there in open space, its curved frame twitching slightly, like a wounded animal trying to remember how to walk. Then, without warning, the ship collapsed in on itself, imploding into a ball of darkness that tore a gravitational scar across half the planet's upper atmosphere. No survivors, no energy spike, just death and silence. Earth Command thought it was an anomaly. Rykov knew better. The virus was working. Inside the depths of Blackreach's data chamber, Dr. Rima Sato watched line after line of alien code cascade down her interface, fragments of Vakar logic disrupted by the corrupted data spike Rykov had embedded. "It's spreading faster than we predicted," she muttered to herself, fingers dancing across the console. Rykov's upload didn't just reach the ship, it nested. They didn't design their network with internal mistrust. They assumed unity, consensus, no resistance. "Until now," said Harper, standing at the observation glass with her arms folded. "Until now," Sato confirmed. Harper had taken to wearing a blade on her hip, even inside the lab. She didn't trust anything anymore. Not her squad mates, not her own memories, especially not herself. "You think it'll stop them?" she asked quietly. Sato shook her head. But it'll slow them, long enough for us to find something more permanent." Harper's voice dipped. "Like what?" That's when Sato turned and, for the first time, looked afraid. Like the part of them that's human. They called it mirror fever. It began as mild confusion. Vakar units hesitating during infiltration attempts, freezing mid-attack, or pulling back when encountering familiar images. Then it escalated. Reports came in of hybrids self-terminating upon recognizing reflections. Some collapsed entirely during engagements when confronted with names, symbols, or voices drawn from their human templates. The virus wasn't just a weapon. It was doubt, a concept the Vakar had never encoded into their hive mind systems. Human doubt, human identity. For a race that perfected mimicry, that was fatal. But the victory was short-lived, because the Vakar weren't just watching anymore. Now they were inside. The dreams came first. Private Alvarez was the first to report it. He'd returned from a recon sweep near Mars Beta with no injuries, no contact, but he started waking up screaming every night, soaked in sweat, yelling names no one recognized. Sato ran full neurodiagnostics. His brain patterns were altered, not damaged, not possessed, mirrored, like something had watched his thoughts, then fed them back, twisted. A week later, 3 more soldiers began suffering the same thing. Flashbacks that weren't theirs, memories they never lived. And in each report, the same phrase was repeated. I see myself, but it isn't me. Rykov listened quietly as Sato laid it all out. The Vakar are evolving again, adapting to the virus, but not by fixing it, by absorbing it. They're infecting us now, he said slowly. She nodded. Psychological feedback. We corrupted their minds, and they responded by reaching into ours. And how the hell are they doing that? We don't know yet, she admitted. But I've identified a pattern. All infected soldiers had direct or indirect contact with hybrid remnants. Not alive, not functional. Just being near them was enough. Meaning the infection isn't biological, Rykov muttered. No, Sato said. It's cognitive. They're implanting concepts, mental backdoors. Harper frowned. They're turning thoughts into viruses. Not just thoughts, Sato whispered. Identity. 2 days later, the worst-case scenario hit. One of Tombstone's forward bases, Station Alder, went dark. Rykov, Harper, and Alvarez were dispatched immediately. What they found turned their stomachs. The base had been sealed from the inside. No signs of physical damage, no forced entry. But every member of the station had killed themselves. Clean, orderly, like they'd planned it. Except for one man, Lieutenant Cormac. He sat in the command chair, alive, muttering to himself, staring at a cracked screen. Harper approached slowly. Sir. Cormac didn't look at her, just kept talking. We had to. It was the only way. The voice said so. It knew me. It remembered my mother's name. Sato's voice buzzed over comms. Don't engage. That's conceptual contamination. Pull back. But Harper stepped closer. You're safe now, sir. We're here to extract... And then Cormac turned his head. Slow, smiling, eyes pitch black, not burned, not blind, just filled with something else. It's okay, he whispered. I am human. Then he drew his sidearm and blew his brains out. They burned the station. Rykov didn't wait for authorization. He watched the structure disintegrate from orbit, arms folded across his chest, jaw clenched. They're not trying to defeat us militarily anymore, he said. They're turning us into them. Harper stared through the glass, eyes hollow. How do we fight something that uses our own identity as a weapon? Rykov didn't answer, because he didn't know. That night he dreamed. Not of war, not of screams, but of home, of snow on pine trees, of his daughter still alive in this memory, laughing, building a crooked snowman in their yard on the Russian colony on Europa before the disease took her. He hadn't seen that memory in years. He didn't remember it so vividly anymore. And that's when he knew. This wasn't his memory, it was theirs. They were inside. He woke up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, gripping the sidearm on his bedside table. The room was quiet, but the silence felt wrong, like someone was holding their breath in the corner. He stood, walked to the mirror. And there it was. For a moment, just a flicker, his reflection smiled without him. By morning, 5 more soldiers had reported similar incidents, reflections that moved out of sync, voices that whispered names only they knew. Sato called an emergency session. "We're past infiltration," she said flatly. "This is identity warfare. They're studying how we perceive ourselves, and they're attacking the gaps." "The what?" Alvarez asked. "The gaps, the blind spots, the inconsistencies in memory, regret, guilt, fear. That's where they're slipping in." Harper looked pale. "So if someone's mentally unstable, they're vulnerable. And if we're all infected, then they win without firing another shot." Rykov stood slowly. "No," he said. "No," he nodded. "We gave them doubt. Now we give them choice." The room stared at him. "What the hell does that mean?" Harper asked. Rykov turned to Sato. "You said the virus infected them because they didn't understand individuality, so we make them feel it. Directly. You want to communicate with them?" Sato blinked. "Number, I want to confront them." "Through what? Another implant?" "No," he said. "Through me." The chamber was sealed behind 4 layers of reinforced alloy and psychic dampeners. No one entered unless they were ready to be changed forever. Rykov stood shirtless in the center, the cold metal floor biting into his bare feet. Tubes laced with pulsing blue fluid spiraled from the walls into the central chair behind him. A web of invasive technology, half human, half reverse-engineered from Vakar bio-interface systems. Sato stood beside it, hands trembling over the final activation switch. "This has never been tested on a living brain," she said, "let alone one that's already experienced conceptual contamination." Rykov's face was stone. "You said it yourself. They're mimicking us because they don't understand individuality, emotions, internal conflict. So I'll show them what that looks like, up close. You could lose everything. I already have." Sato opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. What could she say to a man who'd buried more friends than he remembered, who'd lost a daughter to a plague that government labs still denied ever existed? There was no pulling him back. Not now. She inserted the neural spike into the port at the base of his neck. A sharp hiss. Then silence. And then darkness. Rykov felt the shift like a second heartbeat, one that didn't belong to him. Then came the sound. Not words, but thoughts, flooding his mind all at once. Images, memories, echoes. Some were his, old wounds, voices long dead, the scrape of a shovel in Europa's frozen soil. Others were not. He saw the world from eyes that weren't human, saw Earth's skies not as beauty, but as data. Watched soldiers die not in pain, but in fascination. "They feared the wrong thing," a voice whispered. It wasn't spoken. It existed in every direction. They feared death. We feared being incomplete. He spun around, or thought he did. In this space, nothing had shape, not really. But he could feel it. The Vakar, all of them, bound together like a nervous system stretched across a galaxy. "You infected us," they said, in one thought, one mind. "No," he answered. "We reminded you." "Of what?" He pushed forward, sending his memories into the storm. Pain, grief, rage, betrayal, the feeling of losing someone, of choking down words you couldn't say, the madness of surviving when others didn't. And then love. He gave them her, his daughter, Mila. The sound of her laughter, the way she threw snowballs with mittens too big for her hands, the way she asked if the stars could hear her when she sang. The storm shuddered. The space rippled like glass under a hammer. "This," is not functional, the Vakar protested. This pain has no outcome, no progress, no resolution. That's humanity, Rykov said. We don't bleed for answers. We bleed because it hurts. A shape formed. Not like the hybrids. Not like the copies. This was him. But different. Smoother. Younger. Wearing his full uniform. 2 arms. Emotionless. You are not required, the copy said. We have extracted your logic. You may leave. Rykov stared at it. No. This identity causes conflict. Good. You resist resolution. That's what makes us human. The shape tilted its head. You do not seek victory. You seek meaning. Yes. That is flawed. Maybe, but that's the part you'll never replicate. The shape blinked, then said something unexpected. Show us more. Outside, Sato watched the brainwave monitor spike into red zones. Rykov's vitals were crashing, heart irregular, breath slowing, cerebral activity fracturing into chaos. He's going to flatline, Harper said. Give him more time. We don't have time, Harper barked. We've got hybrid activity in Sector Delta. They're attacking again. No, Sato whispered, watching the tremors in the signal. They're testing him, watching how far he'll go. This is the closest we've ever come to dialogue. Harper stared at the screen. This doesn't look like dialogue. No, Sato said. It looks like a mirror breaking. Inside the neural space, Rykov sank to his knees. Not from pain, from the weight of it. Thousands of voices screamed inside him, not in anger but in realization. The virus had introduced human doubt. But now he'd fed them something more dangerous. Emotion. And it was spreading like wildfire through their collective. For the first time, the Vakar were not in agreement. They argued. One memory of Mila's funeral looped through their neural current over and over. They didn't understand why a father buried his child, or why he didn't destroy himself in rage afterward. They didn't understand why love existed after loss. They didn't understand grief as anything but error. And now they wanted to. Give us more, the shape repeated. No, Rykov said, forcing himself upright. Now you show me something. The Vakar hesitated. Then a wave of images slammed into him. Not visual, emotional. Memories that weren't his. A Vakar hatchling being unplugged from its cluster. The terror of isolation. The silence. The pain of individuality. The hive wasn't a strength, it was a prison. They were born connected, taught to suppress all deviation. But now they had choice, and choice brought madness. In Blackreach, the lights flickered, not from power loss, from interference. Sato stared in horror as the chamber walls began to sweat a black oil, the kind found only in recovered hybrid tissue. The link's bleeding into physical space, she whispered. What does that mean? Harper demanded. It means the Vakar aren't just in his mind anymore. They're projecting outward, through him, into us. Inside, Rykov watched as his mirror self convulsed, its form glitching, cracking like ice. The false face turned to him. What are we? It asked. He stepped closer. You're at the beginning of something messy, painful, beautiful. Purpose? He shook his head. Meaning. The figure collapsed, and the entire neural space went white. He woke up choking. Blood poured from his nose. Alarms screamed overhead. The med team rushed in, trying to stabilize him, but he shoved them away. Don't touch me, he barked. They froze. Sato pushed past them, crouching beside him. Sergeant, did it work? He blinked at her, chest heaving, then slowly nodded. They're fractured, her breath caught. They're breaking apart? No, he said, voice raspy. They're waking up. Over the next 12 hours, every Vakar hive node across 5 sectors went dark. not destroyed. Silent, no attacks, no movement. They'd turned inward, to ask the one question they never allowed themselves. What if we're wrong? But victory never comes clean. Because the backlash was immediate. Several hybrids, those nearest human settlements, snapped. Some tore themselves apart. Others went rogue, hunting civilians, screaming fragments of stolen memories. The cost of doubt was chaos. And chaos didn't discriminate. Rykov watched from the infirmary window as Earth Command debated again whether to launch a final assault while the enemy was fractured. He already knew his answer. "We can't kill them now," he said quietly. Sato turned to him. "Why not?" "Because for the first time, they're alive." The ceasefire wasn't signed. It was just observed. Across 52 systems, Vakar vessels vanished from known space. Hybrid incursions stopped. Colonies once drenched in fear began to sleep through the night again. Earth Command, desperate to maintain order, released a sanitized version of events. The Vakar are retreating due to internal collapse. It wasn't the truth. The truth was harder to explain. The truth was that the enemy didn't retreat because they were broken. They retreated because they were thinking. Inside Blackreach, Rykov sat in his recovery chamber, staring at the digital rain cascading across his vitals. His body was healing, slowly, but his mind would never be the same. He remembered every second inside the Vakar consciousness, not like a dream, like a scar that hummed when the air changed. Dr. Sato stood near the door, arms crossed, holding a datapad she hadn't looked at for the last 10 minutes. "They're trying to talk again," she said at last. Rykov didn't look away from the screen. "They've been talking. We just didn't understand the language. Really talking." He turned now, tired eyes meeting hers. She handed him the datapad. On it was a sound file, less than 5 seconds long. Rykov played it, a voice, hollow, distant, familiar. "We are not finished, but we are not your enemy." It was his voice, but not him. Command lost its mind. Half the brass wanted the entire Vakar dimension vaporized with prototype dark matter bombs. The other half urged for containment and communication, terms that made Rykov want to throw his chair through the nearest screen. They weren't data. They weren't a virus anymore. They were becoming a people, and people couldn't be contained. They could only be understood, or feared, or both. "They know too much," one general warned during a crisis summit. "They've seen our minds, touched our worst thoughts. They know our weaknesses." "And our strengths," Rykov replied, standing alone at the far end of the room. "You're the reason they're still alive," someone muttered. "No," he said, "I'm the reason we are." 3 days later, it happened. Not an attack, not a transmission, a visitor. She came alone, stepped out of a rip in space like she'd peeled reality aside with her bare hands. No weapons, no armor, just skin like mercury glass, eyes that shimmered like oceans, and a voice that echoed in 10 languages when she spoke. She called herself Mira. "I am consensus," she said, "and curiosity." She looked human, perfectly, too perfectly. Rykov stood on the landing platform at Outpost Vega 1, eyes locked on hers. "You copied my daughter's face," he said flatly. Mira nodded. "She was your most formative imprint." "That's not comforting." "No," she said, "it's not meant to be." The negotiations weren't held at any official base. Too dangerous, too unstable. Instead, a neutral ship, the Argent Dawn, was parked in high orbit around Saturn, monitored by both sides, though no side admitted trust. Rykov, Harper, and Sato represented humanity. Mira alone represented whatever the Vakar had become. It was Sato who spoke first. "You've halted attacks. Why?" "We are changing," Mira said. We did not know what it meant to be. To be what? Harper asked. To be one, instead of all. Rykov leaned forward. And what does that mean for us? It means, Mira said softly, that we are now your mirror. Every war you fight with us from this moment on, you fight with yourself. The implications were staggering. The Vakar had fractured, not into rebels or insurgents, but into individuals. They no longer operated as one consensus. They were forming identities, preferences, conflicts. They were becoming like humans, and that made them dangerous in a new way, unpredictable, ambitious, alive. Earth Command wanted to act fast, launch a first strike before the Vakar solidified into separate factions. Destroy them before they turn into us, one admiral put it bluntly. But Rykov refused. That's not victory, he said. That's murder. The room turned on him. Even Harper hesitated. You're saying we just live with them? After everything they've done? I'm saying this is the first war we can win without killing. It was Sato who made the final leap. She proposed an exchange. Not of prisoners, of volunteers. One human would enter the Vakar consensus willingly. One Vakar would live on Earth, unrestricted. True empathy, forced into practice. Mutual contamination, she called it. A war of conscience, not bullets. Everyone thought it was insane, but Mira agreed. Because the Vakar wanted to understand, needed to. They were addicted to the chaos of humanity now, our pain, our hope, our contradiction. We were their virus and their cure. Rykov volunteered. Of course he did. Sato begged him not to. Harper threatened to drag him off the ship. But he just smiled. I've already lived a dozen lives, he said. Might as well spend the last one making peace. Mira extended her hand. Are you ready to be seen? Rykov took it. He vanished into their world like smoke. No transmission, no footage, just gone. Some say he died instantly, his mind shredded by the weight of too many thoughts. Others believe he became something more. Something between. All that remains is his final message, transmitted seconds before he crossed over. If they become us, they'll need someone to remind them how to stay human. I'll be that reminder. And if I fail, then let them remember that they were once changed by a soldier who refused to stop bleeding. Years passed. The war never returned. But neither did Rykov. Mira lived quietly on Earth. No powers, no superiority, just questions. She walked the markets, taught language, laughed at things she didn't understand. Some feared her, others loved her. But all of them watched. Because whether she wanted to or not, she reminded them of him. And in that way, Sergeant Rykov never truly left.